They say a mother can hear the truth before it's spoken. That night, the key turned in the lock long after the street had gone quiet, and in the first syllable my son offered me, I knew something real had shifted. Was it trouble or the kind of change you pray for? I stood in the dark kitchen holding my breath, listening, because sometimes the voice tells you more than the words ever will. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. The house was the kind of quiet that happens after dishes are done and the TV is finally silenced. A pot of chamomile sat cooling on the stove, and the old clock over the doorway ticked like a cricket hiding behind the drywall. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner and moved on, leaving the street to the soft shiver of leaves. I had kept one lamp on, the small one by the sink that turns the stainless steel into a dim river. The knob turned, careful, as if not to disturb me. He had always been thoughtful that way. Even when he was little and tracked mud across the tile, he'd tiptoe to avoid waking me. The door eased open and closed with a polite click. I didn't call out. I wanted to meet the moment as it arrived. His shoes skimmed the entry mat, then paused. I could sense him looking toward the kitchen, the rectangle of light. He took a breath, slow, measured, and the sound of it went straight to the part of me that remembers first days of school and nights he had fevers. "Mom," he said, just above a whisper. "I'm here," I answered, letting the word glow as gently as the lamp. He stepped into the frame of light, shoulders a little rounded from the day. The collar of his jacket held a trace of the night air, cool and a little metallic, like coins in a pocket. He wasn't disheveled. He wasn't defeated, but his voice carried the soft, careful edges of someone choosing each word. "You're late," I said, not to scold, but to open a door he could walk through with whatever truth he carried. He nodded, eyes flicking to the mug by the stove as if it were a harbor. "I know," he said. The two words were steady, and underneath them I heard a tremor that wasn't fear. It was something like relief, the way someone sounds when the weight they've been holding finally shifts to both hands. "Tea?" I offered. He smiled, the small kind that only moves one corner of the mouth. "Please." I poured. The chamomile had cooled to the exact point where steam no longer curls, but the scent still rises. Apple sweet, a hint of hay. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked not at me, but at the light pooling on the countertop, like a person studying a shoreline before stepping in. "I took the long way home," he said. The sentence floated between us, plain as a folded shirt. "Mum," I answered, prompting without pressing. He took a sip, set the mug down carefully, and then the truth in his voice lifted its head. "I needed to think," he continued, and there it was, the note I'd heard in the doorway. Not brokenness, not guilt, a careful courage. The clock ticked 3 beats. The refrigerator hummed like a polite guest. I could almost see his thoughts arranging themselves, as if he were lining up picture frames on a mantel. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't a boy's look. It was the steady gaze of someone measuring his life and deciding to claim it. "I said something tonight," he began, and the word "said" rang with the weight of a key fitting the right lock. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Years of mothering had taught me that the right silence is a soft chair for the truth to sit in. He took another breath, and I watched his shoulders come level, as if bracing against wind that had finally calmed. I told someone the truth about how I've been feeling, about what I want, about what I don't want to pretend about anymore. The words were careful but not timid, firm without being hard. I felt an old memory flicker. Him at 8, standing on a diving board, toes curled, the whole pool waiting, the first jump not about water, but about choosing to trust what would hold him up. How did it feel? I asked. He let out a small laugh, one that sounded like a window unlatched, like opening a door that's been stuck for years. He wasn't ready to lay out all the details, and I didn't ask him to. He didn't need a spotlight. He needed a place to land. So I slid the cookie tin closer, the one we keep for late nights and small victories, and he took one like a handshake at the end of a hard day. "Mom," he said, and there was gratitude in the single syllable, "I thought you might be angry. Or disappointed." He glanced at me, bracing. "Angry at you for telling the truth?" I asked. The question softened the space. "I might worry. That's in the job description." "But disappointed?" "No." I kept my voice low and even, the way you speak to someone steadying a tray full of glass. He nodded, and the tension around his mouth lowered its guard. We stood together in that small kitchen, two people and a lamp and a clock that had watched us for years. I remembered the first time he came home late and told me a story about missing a bus. The edges hadn't quite matched. Tonight, his story fit, edges clean, corners true. Even without the details, I could hear it. Conviction takes up a particular shape in a voice, and his had found it. "Whatever this is," I said, "you're not alone in it." He let the words settle. The house seemed to lean in, the way old houses do when they recognize their people. Outside, a car door thumped and a dog barked twice, then let the street return to quiet. My son reached for the mug again and held it in both hands, as if the warmth could teach his fingers a new way to relax. "I'm going to sleep," he said after a while, a calm that belonged to him now and not to my reassurances. "There's more I want to say, if you'll listen tomorrow." I smiled. "Tomorrow has a chair with your name on it." He grinned, the kind that touches the eyes, and kissed the air near my cheek the way he did when he was small and sticky with jam, then headed down the hallway. When his door clicked shut, I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer. I turned off the lamp and watched the square of light shrink to a coin, then to nothing. In the dark, I could still hear his voice, steadier than it had been, clearer than before. It wasn't the hour that mattered, I realized, but the sound of a person meeting himself and coming home. And though I didn't know all of what tomorrow would bring, I knew this. The truth, once spoken, as a way of lighting the hallway, even after the lamp is out. The next morning began with a hush, the kind of silence that feels like the world is waiting for something to unfold. I woke earlier than usual, not because of the alarm, but because my mind had never fully settled after the night before. I could still hear his voice, steady yet careful, echoing in the quiet spaces of my thoughts. It was a voice that carried truth, even if it had not yet spoken all of it. I made coffee, set the mugs on the table, and waited. The sunlight slipped across the kitchen tiles, soft and golden, as though it too wanted to keep its voice low until he was ready. When I finally heard his door creak open, there was no hesitancy in his steps. He walked with the rhythm of someone who had decided, at least in part, not to hide anymore. His hair was tousled, his eyes shadowed from too little sleep, but his jaw was firm, his shoulders squared. "Morning," he said, and the word had a weight that yesterday's greeting had not. I poured coffee into his mug and slid it toward him. He sat down, curling his hands around it like it was the one thing tethering him to steadiness. For a while we spoke of small things, the weather that promised rain by evening, a neighbor's new fence, the squeak in the old gate. But underneath those words was the tide pulling us both toward what had to be said. He glanced at me over the rim of his mug and then set it down with care, as though buying himself one more heartbeat before opening the door fully. "I've been holding something back for a long time," he said. His tone was softer than the night before, but his eyes were sharper, clearer, as though the decision to speak was solidifying with every syllable. And I can't keep carrying it alone. I felt my breath catch, not in fear, but in recognition. This was not about mistakes or failures. His voice told me that much. This was about stepping into his own life, about peeling away the layers he had built around himself to keep from being questioned or judged. I nodded once, slowly, to let him know that the space was his, and that nothing he said would send me away. He took a deep breath, leaned forward, and spoke the kind of words that make a mother realize her child is no longer a child. I told someone last night who I really am, what I really want for my life, and I was terrified. But afterward, I wasn't afraid anymore. It felt right. His words came out measured, almost reverent, like placing fragile glass on a shelf. My chest tightened, not with worry but with something else, a mix of pride and sorrow for the years he had felt the need to hide. He searched my face, bracing himself, as if he feared my silence more than any storm of words. I reached across the table, my hand covering his, not squeezing but anchoring. "The truth has been in your voice since you walked in last night," I said gently. "I don't need every detail to know that you're stepping into yourself. And I am here. Always." His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in release. The relief was visible, like watching a rope loosen after being pulled too tight for too long. He closed his eyes for a moment, his breath steadying, then opened them again with a kind of gratitude that was raw, unpolished, and real. The clock ticked above us, but time felt different. It wasn't rushing or dragging. It was simply holding space, letting us sit in the honesty of the moment. He began to talk more then, not everything, but enough. About the years of quiet confusion, about the way he had practiced conversations in his head, but never spoken them aloud, about the fear of letting me down. And with every word, his voice grew firmer, steadier, as if telling the truth was building a bridge beneath his feet with every step. When he paused, I told him something I had carried quietly for years, that I had seen glimpses of this truth long ago, that a mother often knows even when words aren't spoken. But knowing and hearing it from you, I said, are not the same. Today you let me in, and that matters more than anything. His eyes softened, wet at the edges, and he nodded with a small, unguarded smile, the kind that spoke of both exhaustion and relief. We sat there until the sun shifted higher, warming the room in golden sheets of light. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. His voice had told me the truth, and now the air between us carried no shadows. For the first time in a long while, I felt we were walking side by side on the same road, the kind where the path might twist, but the ground beneath was honest and sure. The rain promised that morning finally came by late afternoon, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that filled the house with its own kind of music. I sat by the window with a book open on my lap, though I hadn't turned a page in over an hour. My thoughts stayed with my son, with the courage in his voice, with the way his eyes had shifted when he finally allowed himself to be seen. The house felt different now, lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after years of holding breath. When he joined me in the living room, he carried that same steadiness he had found at the kitchen table, though I could tell he was still testing it, still seeing how it felt to wear honesty like a coat he'd only just put on. He sank into the chair across from me, not slouching but leaning forward, elbows on his knees, fingers linked. The rain's steady rhythm filled the silence between us, and for once it wasn't a heavy silence. It was patient, waiting for him to speak when he was ready. "Mom," he said after a while, "I don't think I realized how much I was hiding from myself, let alone from you." His tone wasn't self-pitying. It was reflective, like someone looking at an old photograph of themselves and finally seeing the cracks beneath the smile. Last night wasn't just about telling the truth to someone else. It was about admitting it to me. He shook his head slightly, almost in disbelief, then let out a breath that sounded like the first step onto solid ground. I nodded slowly, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to show him that I was listening, not judging. "That's the hardest part, isn't it?" I said softly. "Not the world. Not me. It's looking in the mirror and saying, 'This is who I am.'" His eyes flicked toward mine then, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to run home with scraped knees and look to me for reassurance. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man carrying truths that had shaped him quietly in ways I hadn't fully known. "I thought if I spoke it out loud, I'd lose something," he admitted. "But instead, I feel like I've gained something I didn't know I was missing." The rain softened, becoming more of a whisper on the glass, and I felt the weight of what he was saying press gently against my heart. We often talk about love as though it's only about giving, but sometimes the truest love is about holding still, letting someone lay down their burdens without rushing to fix them. I leaned back, letting the cushion catch me, and said, "You haven't lost anything. You've just made room for yourself." He was quiet after that, staring at the window as if the drops sliding down the glass were spelling something only he could read. I could see his mind working, shaping his next thought, testing it before he let it out. Finally, he turned back to me. "I was afraid you'd see me differently," he said. His voice wasn't breaking, but it carried the raw edge of someone admitting their deepest fear. I shook my head, firmly this time, not to dismiss his worry, but to set it down where it belonged, outside of us. "You're my son. Nothing you say will change that. And the truth doesn't make me see you differently. It makes me see you more clearly. And that, my love, is a gift." Something shifted in his face then, like clouds parting just enough for light to break through. He leaned back in the chair, shoulders finally relaxing, as if the last thread of tension had let go. "You've always been the one place I felt safe," he said quietly. "I don't know why it took me so long to remember that." I smiled, though my throat tightened at his words. Sometimes we need to walk through the long way home to realize where the door has always been. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and outside, the world seemed freshly washed, streets glistening under the dim glow of the streetlights. We didn't speak much more that evening. We didn't need to. His presence in the room, the comfort of honesty between us, was enough. He stayed nearby, not retreating to his room as he usually would. He sat with me through dinner, laughed softly at a story from years ago, and even helped clear the dishes without me asking. As night deepened, I noticed something subtle yet powerful. The heaviness he had carried for so long wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was lighter now. He wasn't dragging it behind him anymore. He was learning to carry it as part of himself, no longer something to hide. And I knew then that his voice, the one that had told me the truth, would only grow stronger from here. When I finally went to bed, the sound of rain had stopped, leaving the night unusually still. As I lay down, I thought about how rare these moments are, when a son becomes not just someone you raise, but someone who teaches you in return. His truth had not only changed him, it had changed me too. It reminded me that love isn't about keeping things the same. It's about walking with someone as they find who they are, and learning. The following morning carried a brightness that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. The air was crisp, almost celebratory, as if the world itself knew something had shifted. Sunlight painted long lines across the floorboards, and I moved slowly, taking in the quiet peace of the kitchen as I prepared breakfast. It felt different now, less like a routine and more like a ritual of beginning again. My son joined me not long after, his steps lighter than they had been in weeks. There was a steadiness about him now, not forced but natural, like he had finally found a rhythm that belonged to him alone. He sat down at the table and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask permission but simply arrives, honest and unguarded. "You were right," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Speaking the truth didn't take anything away. It gave me back myself." I slid a plate toward him and watched as he took a bite, his movements unhurried. His voice carried no tremor this time, no hesitation. He spoke with clarity, and in that clarity I heard freedom. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of what that means. I can face it." I reached across the table, brushing his hand lightly, and said, "Not knowing is part of living. What matters is that you're standing in your own truth now. That's the ground that won't slip away." He nodded, and I could see him absorbing the words, not just hearing them. His shoulders held no tension. His eyes carried no shadow. Later that day, we went for a walk together. The neighborhood was alive with simple noises, the hum of a lawnmower, children laughing somewhere down the block, the flap of laundry in the wind. He walked beside me, taller than I remembered him being just yesterday, or perhaps it was simply the way he carried himself now. We didn't need to fill the space with constant words. The comfort of walking together was enough. At one point, he stopped to look at the park where he had played as a boy. The swings creaked in the breeze, empty for now, but they seemed to hold memories of his laughter, his small hands gripping the chains. He smiled faintly, and I caught the look in his eyes, a recognition of how far he had come. "It feels like a lifetime ago," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered, "and somehow only yesterday." That evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and rose, we sat on the porch together. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and earth, damp from yesterday's rain. He turned to me then, more certain than I had ever seen him. "Mom, thank you. For listening. For not pushing. For letting me find the words in my own time." I felt a warmth spread through me, not just of pride, but of deep gratitude. "That's what love is," I told him. "It's not forcing someone into the light. It's holding the door open until they're ready to walk through." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was rich, full of the understanding we had both reached. He leaned back, exhaling, his expression calm, his heart lighter. And in that moment, I realized that his truth had given me something too, a reminder that even as a parent, we never stop learning from our children. When night fell and the stars appeared, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My son had returned home late that first night, his voice trembling with the truth he could no longer hide. Now, days later, I could hear that same voice, but it was different, clear, strong, and free. And as I sat beside him, I understood that the journey of honesty, though sometimes painful, always leads us closer to ourselves and to each other. His truth had become our truth, and in that shared space, we found not just understanding, but a deeper kind of love that would carry us both forward.